In this very in-depth forecast, the Arklatex region is currently being monitored for the possibility of a tornado outbreak, as widespread linear and messy severe storms with the possibility of discrete supercells will harbor the possibility of multiple tornadoes, some of which are forecast to be strong to even violent, scattered significant hail upwards of 2 to 3 inches, and scattered significant damaging wind gusts upwards of 70 miles per hour. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone and welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for April 4th of 2025. For today we have a moderate risk for the Arklatex region extending into the Mississippi River Valley, mainly targeting the Arkansas region. And this is going to be a tornado-driven moderate risk. So we are going to see a 15% risk for tornadoes for today, with the possibility of tornadoes extending at least all the way into eastern Texas, potentially into some portions of central Texas, and then all the way back into southern Indiana and portions of Kentucky, or the majority of Kentucky there. But with a 15% risk for tornadoes, that comes the possibility of a tornado outbreak. We could see the possibility of multiple strong tornadoes, and some of which could even be violent and even long track. So definitely a dangerous risk for severe weather for today across Arkansas. And unfortunately, it's kind of been like this for the entire week. We had a high risk just 2 days ago that I wasn't able to cover because I've been sick over the past couple of days. So Arkansas just really hasn't been getting a break. We also do have a 30% unhatched wind risk for the northern portion of that risk for northern Arkansas, southern southeastern Missouri, southern Illinois, southern Indiana, western Kentucky, northwestern Tennessee, where we could see some scattered damaging wind gusts there. And then for our hail risk, we do have two main areas for hail. In fact, we actually have two main areas for severe weather development as a whole, with a 30% risk for hail in the moderate risk area, where we could see the possibility of some significant hail across this region, upwards of 2 to 3 inches. Then we also have another hatched area here back to the southwest for central into southern Texas there, where we are going to see some messy and severe storms just blow up later on in the afternoon. While storms are already ongoing in the moderate risk region. However, they shouldn't really be too much of a risk. They aren't really going to harbor too much of a tornado potential, but they will harbor the possibility of some scattered damaging wind gusts and some significant hail. And then for tomorrow, we have an enhanced risk and again the potential for significant tornadoes that has expanded since the last time I checked this outlook, where we do have a 10% risk for tornadoes across southern Arkansas, Louisiana, eastern Texas, and portions of Mississippi along the Mississippi River there, where we could see the possibility of a few tornadoes, some of which could be strong, with the possibility of tornadoes extending up into Tennessee, Kentucky, southern Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, and even all the way into southern Pennsylvania and Maryland. Then for our day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for the southern United States, for the Florida Panhandle, southern Mississippi, portions of coastal Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, uh, northern or western South Carolina, into portions of extreme southwestern North Carolina there. Then for our day 4, day 8 outlook, we currently don't have anything issued. Taking a look at our WPC outlook, severe weather isn't going to be the only dangerous risk for today. We do have a high risk for excessive rainfall, or a high risk for flash flooding, with at least a 70% risk for flash flooding across this region for southern Missouri, Arkansas, into eastern Oklahoma there. Where we're going to see some widespread and potentially widespread significant flash flooding that is going to rival historic numbers for rainfall across this region, especially over the next 2 or so days. We had a high risk for flash flooding yesterday, and that risk is only going to continue into tomorrow as well, with a high risk for flash flooding for Arkansas and northern Mississippi, western Tennessee, western Kentucky, and portions of southeastern Missouri, southern Illinois, and maybe portions of southern Indiana there. Again, some historic numbers for rainfall across Arkansas and the surrounding regions, with some rainfall totals that have been forecasted over the next 2 days to potentially get upwards of 7 to even 10, maybe even approaching 15 inches in some areas. Anywhere between 7 to 15 inches are expected for rainfall over the next 48 hours. Taking a look at our weather models, starting off with our 500 millibars like we usually do, we are expected to see a nice trough that is going to advect into this region. That's going to support the risk for severe thunderstorms with a speed maxima here. That's going to be the primary driver for these severe thunderstorms overhead, with the speed maxima potentially getting upwards of 70 knots, potentially even approaching 75 knots in some regions. Definitely a lot of forcing backing these storms, and definitely going to support quite a lot of shear as well for the possibility of hail and the possibility of tornadoes as well. And this speed maxima, or this trough in general, when this speed maxima weakens and moves off to the northeast, the trough is going to continue to move in and support the further risk for severe thunderstorms as it strengthens into tomorrow. Taking a look at our 700 millibars and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region, or primarily our directional shear and how that's going to affect our tornadoes across this region, we're expected to see a really strong low-level jet that's going to blow out of the north here, or out of the south, with a 700 millibar flow that appears to be getting upwards of 50 to potentially even 55 knots, maybe even approaching 60 knots in some regions. It's going to support some really strong directional shear across this region, really nice curved photographs, and definitely the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region. Again, some of which are forecast to probably be strong and maybe even violent. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that's going to affect our risk for hail across this region, overall our risk for severe thunderstorms as well. We are expected to see some really strong 200 millibar flow that's going to be backing our storms as well. Not really going to be a whole lot of defluence. The defluence is really only noticeable after storms develop. But before storms develop, it's going to be pretty stream-wise, not really a whole, or not really stream-wise, but pretty direct. Not really a whole lot of defluence aloft, but still a lot of 200 millibar flow. Definitely going to assist in our risk for severe thunderstorms and definitely elongate photographs quite substantially and support that risk for hail across this region. Definitely the potential for some significant hail, again, upwards of 2 to 3 inches. And then further down to the south or the southwest, where that other risk for large hail and other severe thunderstorms is going to be expected, that's where we're going to see the bulk of our 200 millibar flow, with 200 millibar flow that is going to be getting upwards of 115 knots, mainly approaching 115 knots across that region before storms develop. That is going to support some really elongated photographs and a really significant risk for hail across this region. Overall, the risk for hail isn't up to par with what we're seeing across the moderate risk region. It isn't a 30% because storms aren't really going to be covering as great of an area as the risks or as the storms to the north is. So that's why our risk for hail is going to be lower, but we are still going to see a pretty substantial risk for hail to the southwest. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative listing, how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are going to see some really strong directional shear across this region, really nice curved photographs with storm relative felicity values across the moderate risk region that is expected to get upwards of anywhere from what seems to be the mid 400s, maybe even approaching 500s in some areas. Mainly hovering around the 300, 350, 400, 450 range. That is really strong directional shear and definitely can support the possibility for strong tornadoes, potentially even violent tornadoes as well, especially with how widespread our storms are going to be and the possibility for some of those storms to be discrete as well. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how this can affect our risk for hail across this region and our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, we are going to see some really nicely sheared storms, and that's going to support that risk for storms overall. But as far as hail goes, again, nicely sheared storms allows for nice hail. We are expected to see some really strong bulk shear values that are going to be backing our storms, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of 80 knots, around 70 knots, potentially even approaching 90 knots in some areas, especially further off to the west. In our warm sector, we don't typically see bulk shear values that are going to be as strong as backing our storms, but we do have some bulk shear values in our warm sector upwards of 30 to 40 knots. Further down to the southwest, where we are expected to see more of a risk for a significant hail, we're expected to see some great shear across the southwest here, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of 90 to even 100 knots in some areas, potentially even approaching 105 knots. So these storms are going to absolutely blow up in a very nicely sheared environment. There isn't going to be too much of a low level jet, so you aren't really looking forward to much of a tornado risk across this region, but you are definitely going to be looking towards a substantial hail risk, especially with how strong these bulk shear values are and how elongated photographs are going to be. Taking a look at our radar analysis, what our different models are outputting, as well as how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms as a whole and our risk for tornadoes. The majority of models are outputting more of a linear system developing across this region. We aren't really expected to see too many discrete supercells. If a discrete supercell does develop, then we're definitely going to watch that, as that could definitely become a prolific tornado producer, especially with the environment that it will be in. However, the majority of storms are going to be mostly linear. That will favor more of a damaging wind gust risk and the risk for hail. However, tornadoes are definitely not off the table. We are still expected to see several tornadoes embedded in this line, some of which could even be violent and definitely going to be strong. Um, it's just going to be harder for storms to really tap into the environment if they're in more of a linear system. More of a linear fashion makes it harder for tornadic development, but several tornadoes are still expected. Taking a look at our temperatures, from here on out, we're going to be looking at the environment that storms are going to be in, mainly the warm sector and how that's going to affect our storms overall. So basically the ingredients outside of shear and our winds that our storms are going to be affected by. So stuff like instability, as well as our composite models like STP and EHI. So taking a look at our temperatures, we are expected to see a a cold front that is going to push out of the south here, or out of the west. That is going to trigger the majority of our storms. Um, and we are going to see a warm front that's also going to be draped off to the north here, and that's going to be connected by a surface low here. And with that cold front, again, that's where the majority of our storms are going to be on. However, with winds that are mostly out of the south, that are going to be mostly parallel to that cold front, that is going to encourage storms to be more in a linear fashion. So any discrete storms are going to be an outlier, but if they do develop in the warm sector where the ingredients are good, they could definitely become prolific tornado producers. However, the majority of our storms and the majority of our threat is going to be those linear storms. However, with temperatures that are going to be getting upwards of 80 degrees, potentially even higher across this area, that is going to support a lot of instability and a lot of energy for storms to use. Taking a look at our dew points and how that is going to work in tangent for our instability and overall our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, you can see those fronts a little better here, with the cold front along our moisture gradient. It isn't really a dry line. There is going to be a cold front across this region, and then again our warm front off to the north, where our wind shift is and where our moisture gradient is as well, and then where our winds are circling in a circle there where our two fronts connect. That's where our surface low is. But we have a lot of moisture across a warm sector here, with dew points that are going to be getting upwards of 70 degrees, potentially even 75 degrees in some areas. So an insane amount of moisture is expected across this region, and with some really nice temperatures as well, that is going to support a lot of instability across this region and support the possibility of some strong tornadoes and potentially even violent tornadoes as well. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for our various hazards across this region, our lapse rates are going to be pretty weak across this region. We aren't really going to see lapse rates that are going to be too terribly strong. Our lapse rates are mostly going to be around 6 across this region, aren't really going to be getting upwards of 7. They are going to be a little bit stronger down to the south, where we're going to see that see more of a hail risk, and again, that will support more of a hail risk. I wouldn't be surprised if the SBC does increase that hail risk further down to the southwest up to a 30%, because right now it's still only at a 15%. It's probably mainly just because of the coverage of storms that it's remaining at 15%. However, uh, we aren't really going to see lap trails are going to be too strong. That is going to limit our instability a little bit, or at least limit it in the sense where it's not going to be as strong as what it could be with strong lapse rates. However, we do have really strong dew points, a lot of moisture across this region, and really strong heat as well. So that will support our instability regardless. And we do have at least weak lapse rates, so that's still going to encourage our instability. However, with weaker lapse rates, it's not going to be as strong as what it could be. Regardless, lapse rates that are at least weak will definitely encourage that risk for hail across this region and allow for hailstones to get bigger, as well as encourage updraft strength and in turn instability overall. And then with increased lapse rates, that is also going to assist with our damaging wind gust risk as well, as it will encourage stronger winds from the elevated regions of the atmosphere to mix down to the surface. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are going to see some pretty heavy cloud cover, some pretty widespread cloud cover across this region. The sun is definitely shining in some areas, however, it is mostly blanketed by clouds. With some broken cloud cover, that will encourage our lapse rates to increase at least a little bit. However, with it being mostly covered by clouds, that is leading to our weakened lapse rates. However, regardless, we do have some pretty substantial heat and some pretty substantial moisture that is encouraging some pretty great instability across this region regardless. Taking a look at our most unstable cape, not our surface-based cape, so don't really take this for how that's going to affect the surface-based aspect of storms. However, storms are definitely going to be surface-based across this area. This is just our instability in general. We are expected to see some really nice cape across this region. Very, very strong cape, potentially getting upwards of 3,000, potentially even 3,500, maybe even approaching 4,000 joules per kilogram in some areas. However, with instability upwards of 3,000 to 3,500, that is really strong. That's way beyond weak and definitely going to support the possibility for a few strong tornadoes potentially likely, as well as violent tornadoes across this region being possible, as well as our possibility for significant damaging wind gusts and the possibility for significant hail as well. Taking a look at our surface-based cape and how that's going to affect our storms overall, how that's going to affect the surface-based aspect of them. Storms are definitely going to be surface-based. There's not going to be a question about it. The majority of our most unstable cape does translate down to our surface-based cape, meaning that storms will be surface-based and will be able to support the possibility of tornadoes, as well as the possibility of some significant hail and strong damaging wind gusts across this region. But again, storms should have absolutely no problem whatsoever being surface-based, so we are definitely in for a long night. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see some really strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability values across this region. So, really strong instability at the surface level. It will encourage surface-based cape, as well as assist when accompanied by a strong, most unstable cape. Will definitely assist in the rapid development of storms across this region, and definitely assist in the strength of tornadoes and the strength of storms in general across this region. So, whenever we have strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability like this, it is definitely a major aiding factor in the strength of our storms overall. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to indicate our risk for tornadoes across this region, we have some insane energy helicity index values across this region. Energy helicity index values that are expected to get upwards of 9, potentially even 10 in some regions, mainly hovering around 7 to 9, in approaching again 10s in some regions. That is indicating the strong overlap of strong instability and strong shear across this region that is definitely going to provide a very conducive environment for strong, potentially even violent tornadoes across this region. And if not, multiple tornadoes are likely across this region later this afternoon. Taking a look at our STP, our significant tornado parameter, and how that's going to indicate our risk for tornadoes across this region. Basically, a more advanced version of the Energy Helicity Index. It takes into account more different parameters than just Energy Helicity Index, where it only takes into account our instability and our directional shear, while this takes into account multiple different parameters and how that's going to affect the risk for tornadoes across this region. We have some really strong significant tornado parameter values across this region, values that are going to be ranging anywhere from 7 to 8 and potentially even 9 across this region, right in that moderate risk region. Again, very strong significant Again, very strong significant tornado parameter values are going to indicate the potential for multiple strong tornadoes, potentially even violent as well. Taking a look at our mesoanalysis for our various hail parameters as well as our damaging wind parameters, starting off with our significant hail parameter. Uh, Again, with lapse rates being weaker and sugared down to the southwest, we do have overall more of a risk for hail to the southwest, and that's what our significant hail parameter is indicating here as well, with overall more of a risk for hail down to the southwest. However, a non-zero risk for hail to the north as well, and the risk for significant hail to the north in that moderate risk area. For our SARS hail size, we again do have the possibility for larger hailstones and more of a hail risk further down to the southwest, but still the possibility for some significant hail to the north. For our significant hail percentage, indicating a lot of the same thing, just in general, the risk for hail and the risk for significant hail. And then for our large hail parameter, again, a lot of the same thing with a larger risk for hail down to the south, but still a risk for significant hail to the north. For our damaging wind gust risks, we are going to look at our D-cape specifically. It's basically the reverse of our instability, where instability or our cape, it indicates the tendency for air to rise, while D-cape indicates the tendency for air to sink. And we have some really strong D-cape values across this region. D-cape values upwards of 1,000, 1,010. 1,400 across this region that is likely going to move off to the north as storms develop, as moisture continues to advect to the north, as the majority of our ingredients continues to advect to the north, and that risk for severe weather develops across that moderate risk region, we will likely see strengthening decay values as well. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description to check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow in another forecast.